Well, good morning and welcome to another episode of Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training, and this is webcast number 166. It's Wednesday, the 25th of August. So what have we got for you today? Well, Stuart Garner is facing court over the Norton Pension Fund raids. Sturgis rally out in Dakota, South Dakota, has sent their COVID figures soaring for the second year in a row. There's news of a new R9 from Yamaha, which will plug the affordable sports bike gap. Yamaha has limited plans at the moment for electric powered two-wheelers, and we'll have a look at that. Scarborough Gold Cup meeting has been cancelled due to safety and insurance problems, and bikes have been banned from the Pikes Peak hillclimb. And I'll finish off with today's talking point. We'll be looking at motorcycle waterproofs, and we'll be asking, why aren't they? So settle yourself down for the next 30 minutes or so as I take you through some topical news, sometimes controversial views, and our better biking tips. All right, okay, so kick off with the first story. This one has been running, as you probably know now, for quite some time. The former Norton Motorcycles director and owner, Stuart Garner, is facing court for allegedly breaching rules on ploughing cash from staff pension funds back into the business itself. The pension regulator said on Friday last week that Garner will appear at Derby Magistrates Court on November the 15th, and he'll be charged with 3 separate offences under Section 40 brackets 5 of the Pension Act 1995. That's actually one in connection with each of the staff retirement schemes for which he was the sole trustee. He's accused of breaching employer-related investment, ERI rules, as he invested over 5% of the assets from each scheme into his business, Norton Motorcycle Holdings Limited. Those investments were made over 2012 and 2013 and were made in return for preference shares. Now, it's a criminal offence to invest over 5% of the current market value of the scheme in ERIs. Now, the investigation is following allegations by no less than 227 pension fund members that Garner used the money that was invested in 3 schemes, Dominator 2012, Commando 2012, and Norton MC, to prop up the ailing company, which finally collapsed, as you probably know, last year. The pension ombudsman previously ordered the former director to repay all the money he'd invested into the firm from the company pension schemes, and Garner was subsequently denied permission to appeal the 14 million repayment. Okay, now I did have a picture for this, but I seem to have lost it, so I'll have to make do without. Coronavirus cases have surged in South Dakota for the second year in a row after the world-famous Sturgis motorcycle rally took place there a fortnight ago. Now, last year, the meeting was dubbed a super spreader event, and there was a well-documented rise in coronavirus cases, not only in South Dakota, but also across the US. Now, we'll have a look at that in just a moment. In the run-up to the event last year, officials estimated that just half the normal number of rally goers would actually turn up. But in fact, just 7% or so stayed away, and 460,000 people actually attended the rally, which was just down 7% on 2019. Now, after the rally, researchers were able to do something quite interesting. What they did was they matched new confirmed COVID-19 cases with anonymized cell phone tracking data. Basically, what that allowed the researchers to do is to calculate how many attendees came from each county right across the US. And what they did then was they took counties with many Sturgis attendees, such as Clark County, Nevada, and Maricopa County, Arizona. Those are two examples given, to similar areas where there were relatively few people travelling to Sturgis. And what that allowed them to do was to estimate the number of new cases which arose from exposure to the coronavirus during the rally, and the cases that were then caused by secondary transmission after the attendees returned home. And basically what they calculated nationwide was that around 260,000 new coronavirus cases were actually related directly to the Sturgis gathering. Now, as you probably know, right now the more contagious Delta variant is actually sweeping across the US. And this year's Sturgis event actually saw numbers back to normal, with more than 500,000 people descending on the town. The population is only 6,600, so it's a fairly tiny place to visit. Subsequently, according to New York Times data, there's been a 352% increase in cases across the state of South Dakota. So that's averaging 243 cases and 123 hospitalizations daily. Why did the rally go ahead? Well, basically, it contributes around $800 million to the town of Sturgis each year. Now, the organisers did take some precautions. They made COVID-19 tests, masks, and hand sanitizer available. They also put a temporary order in place which allows for the outdoor consumption of alcohol at the rally, which had street food, bike shows, parties, and live music. But some critics have said that the masks should have been mandatory. Now, others predicted the surge in cases, notably Dr. Anthony Fauci, who you may remember from TV appearances last year. And he said it's understandable that people want to do the kind of things they want to do. They want their freedom to do that, he told NBC. But there comes a time when you're dealing with a public health crisis that could involve you, your family, and everybody else. So it supersedes the need to do exactly what you want to do. And he continued, let's get this pandemic under control before we start acting like nothing is going on. And again, there's concern that riders returning to their communities after the event could also cause problems. Victor Huber, who's a biomedical sciences professor at the University of South Dakota, said, anytime you have a mass gathering of hundreds of thousands of people and they return to their home states, you're going to increase the likelihood of a super spreader event. The Republican governor, Kristi Noem, she told the press that more than 49% of people in South Dakota are fully vaccinated, and she has no plans to up her messaging on vaccines. And she also said it was unconstitutional to enforce mask wearing and to close businesses down during the pandemic. That's where we are with Sturgis at the moment. Now, don't forget, you're watching Kevin Williams here with ELEVENSES on which goes out at 11 on Wednesdays and Sundays, usually live. Very occasionally we get a recorded show going out. Don't forget, if you have any comments, questions, feedback on the show generally, I'm always interested to hear that. And if you want me to cover anything in a future show, do drop me a line. I keep asking this. I still don't get very many replies on that one, but if you anything you'd like me to talk about, drop me a line on that. So okay, so what else is in the news? Well, something that's you've probably seen if you have read motorcycle news is that Yamaha have announced a new sports bike based on the MT-09. Now, funnily enough, I said as soon as I saw the R7 sports bike, which uses the MT-07 platform, I said we'd almost certainly see a similar machine based on the MT-09. And to me, the real surprise is it's actually taken Yamaha so long to get this bike together. The development of the MT-09 actually began almost a decade ago, when Yamaha, according to their own publicity, set out to produce a bike that was different to the across-the-frame four-cylinder bikes of their competitors, and to produce one that was torquier engine and lighter and a more agile motorcycle. Not mentioned was that it was undoubtedly cheaper to build too. So the result was the first triple from the Japanese manufacturer since the XS 750 and the 850 of the late 70s and early 80s, which you may or may not remember. Another factor in the move to a triple was the collapse of the four-cylinder 600 Supersport class. Now, you may remember all the way back in 1987, the CBR 600F first appeared, and it was once described as the perfect all-rounder, and it created an entire class of middleweight sports bikes. There had been 600s before that, but the CBR 600 really shifted the goalposts on, and the other major manufacturers all jumped in with their own versions of a 600 Supersport. But what happened? Well, people started racing them, and of course, the moment they were adopted for Supersport racing, and winning on the track became more important than actually designing a bike that was a useful bike. Because people do buy race replicas, the bikes became increasingly track oriented as the race ready bike took over from the all-rounder design, and the price skyrocketed as well. And eventually, of course, what happened was they became so impractical on the road and so expensive that the sales collapsed. So it's not entirely surprising that the once dominant class actually has virtually disappeared. Now, the other factor in the adoption of the triple engine was the concept of the platform, something that's been widely used in car design for decades. Now, at its simplest, think saloon, hatchback, estate, and van, all based on the same chassis. And the idea is to allow for common design and engineering and production, but you still get distinctly different models appearing from that production line. And the benefit is that you can get a fairly wide model range, but at the benefit of reduced development costs. Now, if you think Honda, they clearly had that in mind when they developed the NC range of bikes, and that's now given rise to a Naked, the adventure bike, a scooter, and also a bagger. They're all based on the same basic chassis and motor. More importantly, it's enabled Honda to keep the costs reasonably under control, although they have crept up recently, I've noticed. The R7 itself is based on the equally affordable MT-07, which has spawned the Trace 700 adventure bike, and also the Tenere sort of off-roader. But the R7 hasn't gone down entirely without criticism, and one thing that's been pointed up is a lack of power. When compared to the R6's 117 brake horsepower or 87 kilowatts. But the point they're missing, really, the people who are complaining about lack of power, is that you have to rev the R6 to 14,500 RPM to get to that power. And combined with its gearing, which is aimed at delivering an impressive top speed, if you're sticking to the speed limit, most of the power is inaccessible nearly all the time. That's the problem with this kind of motorcycle. So the R7, although it has a much more modest 74 horsepower, which is 55 kilowatts, it all comes in at a relatively lowly 9,000 RPM. And more importantly, the torque, which is a very decent 67 Newton meters or 50 pounds-feet if you prefer imperial, it comes in at 6,500 RPM. So it's bang in the middle of the rev range, really. And what it means is the bike delivers its power in the lower gears right where it's usable on the road. You don't have to wind the engine up interminably to get to the power. And that was the criticism with the R6 on the road. But if you do want more power, then the newly announced R9 will fill that hole between the R7 and the range topping and wallet emptying R1. And Yamaha have filed applications for patents for the name R9 in a variety of different places, the EU, UK, USA, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. And they've also registered the YZF-R9 name in the Philippines. So why now? Well, the MT-09 got a complete makeover last year. for this year's 2021 model. New engine, die-cast alloy beam frame, as well as a full electronics package. You get 3-mode traction control, slide control, and wheelie mitigation. All those rider assists. The MT-09 also has an SP model which features uprated Öhlins suspension. So it wasn't too big a guess to see that a fared sports bike would be the next step for that particular platform. So you can expect all the goodies from the MT-09 and the SP suspension to feature, quite possibly with a sort of tweaked geometry to give it slightly sharper steering. Now, the R6, as I said, pumped out 117 horsepower and it weighed in at 190 kilos. And the current MT-09 actually matches that perfectly, 117 horsepower and 189 kilograms fully fueled. The fairing will obviously add a little bit, but they will be pretty much a match in terms of power. But there is one big difference, and that is the MT-09 is likely to produce around 50% more torque, and that alone will make the bike a lot easier to ride on the road. And the other thing is it'll come in at well under the R1's 17k price point, so it'll fill that hole that's been left by the R6 that nobody was buying anyway. The base model MT is just around £9,000. You can add 1,200 to get the uprated Öhlins on the SP version, and my guess is that you'll probably find the R9 in much the same ballpark, probably somewhere between £10,000 and £11,000. So, okay, what else do we know about Yamaha's plans for the future? Well, I've been saying for some time that if the Japanese manufacturers don't look sharp, they'll lose positioning to Chinese and Indian bike builders who are rapidly gearing up to fill the economy end of the electric bike market. But Yamaha don't seem to be concerned, which is interesting. And what they predict is that they won't be producing any kind of mainstream electric superbikes anytime soon. In fact, they're working on the prediction that only 2.6% of riders will have switched to electric PTWs by 2030, and that a sharp increase will only follow the likely ban of ICE bikes by 2035. Now, whether that's an accurate prediction is anybody's guess, but I suspect they're being rather optimistic at the number of people who will be sticking to petrol engine bikes. Now, MCN have reported that Yamaha aim to develop a final generation of petrol fueled bikes that are likely to be able to use the synthetic carbon neutral fuels that are currently being developed. And there's also talk that higher compression ratios and variable valve actuation are likely to be in the pipeline to improve efficiency. To be honest, we've had variable valve timing on cars for decades, and it's even been found on motorcycles for quite a long time. There was a little 400 four-cylinder Suzuki which used variable valve timing ages and ages ago. It's just not been adopted for motorcycles because it adds complexity and costs, and of course it adds a bit of weight as well, I suppose. Nevertheless, Yamaha are expected to be carbon neutral by 2050, which is actually quite late in the timetable, I think, generally globally. And they think that by that time, 90% of their motorcycles will be electric. Now, perhaps the plan is that they just know that they can't compete on price with China and India at the low end of the market. And one thing that they are doing is working on electric vehicles that blur the lines between current classes. You'll undoubtedly be aware of the Nikon and the Tri-City three-wheeled petrol engine bikes. But in their latest report, Yoshihiro Hidaka, who's Yamaha's motor president, said we will aim to create new and unprecedented forms of mobility by combining our mobility techniques based on small powertrains, which they say is a company strength, and that'll with the robotics born of our production technologies. And one of the things that he talks about is this little beast. Now that's the Tritone electric mobility scooter. It's a stand-on machine, very much like the sort of two-wheeled scooters that we see zipping around town now, but with the trademark two front end that Yamaha have been pushing. the benefits are clearly improved stability and better braking as well. So he says that this model was actually developed wondering what we could achieve if we targeted last mile mobility. So in other words, when you have to leave the car somewhere behind or you get off a train, can you use something like this to get to your final destination? And he continued, with our other pursuits, we're not restricting ourselves to existing forms of motorcycles, and we're moving forward with the development of a model taking our LMW platform and technologies, which we've been refining for many years, even further. So that is a heads up as to what you can expect from Yamaha. Not just the R7, which I've already talked about in previous shows, but the forthcoming R9, which is almost certain to appear now, and some interesting sort of micro mobility vehicles. Now, don't forget, set yourself up with a reminder every Wednesday and every Sunday at 11. You can catch up with the show if you don't get it live here on Facebook or over on YouTube, where I put the recordings up just as soon as the show has finished. Right, okay, so back to racing. We've had a bunch of cancellations last week. The Suzuka 8 Hour and the Malay MotoGP bit the dust, but if you were hoping to zip along here domestically to see England's only road race venue and catch the forthcoming September Gold Cup meeting, you're going to be disappointed, because the organisers of the race, which would be held at the Oliver's Mount circuit in Scarborough, have had to cancel the race. Now, prior events this year were axed after safety inspections by Scarborough Council had concluded that many of the buildings around the circuit that are used by the racers were actually structurally unsound and unsafe for public use. Now, there were plans to renovate the buildings during the summer, and so for that reason the Gold Cup race was actually rescheduled for September the 18th and 19th, and race boss Andy Hayes vowed to run the event, quote, no matter what happens, unquote. But the latest statement puts paid to that hope, and he says, with much regret, we have had to admit defeat and cancel the hillclimb schedule for September 11th, 12th, and the Michelin Steve Henshaw Gold Cup planned to take place on September 18 and 19. He goes on to say much negotiation has taken place with Oliver's Mount Racing, Scarborough Borough Council and the ACU, sports governing body, but the health and safety issues that remain will not be completed before the events are due to take place. And this is rather a worry. He continues, apart from health and safety concerns, insurance implications also need to be taken into consideration, pending removal of some of the defective paddock infrastructure. Now, it may not be the insurance about the buildings themselves. It may be insurance regarding actually racing at the event. There have been fatalities at Scarborough, not just amongst the racers, but also when spectators have been hit by fallen bikes. There was such a fatality just a few years ago, which actually caused the suspension of racing for 2 years. So he goes on basically and says that the venue needs significant investment for events such as the Spring Cup, the Barry Sheen Festival and the Gold Cup to take place. Further updates will be given through the winter period, and we look forward to working with our landlord, Scarborough Borough Council, to help us resolve the issues so we can have a full programme of events in 2022. It appears that the Borough Council has agreed to carry out the demolition work, but who pays for it isn't entirely clear, because the costs could run to 6 figures. The club continued that they're totally committed to the future of Oliver's Mount, but they also said we now need to take stock of where this leaves us due to the financial hardship the last 2 seasons many cancellations have created. So the crowdfunding page has been set up to help raise money for the organisers by a Chesterfield-based business called Shop for Bikers. But frankly, it's entirely uncertain what the future for the race is. Realistically, with all the developments of safety at closed circuits, pushing back the barriers, moving sand and gravel traps and runoff, out into the fields basically, and putting spectators ever further away from the action. The great thing about going to Oliver's Mount, if you'd never been there, was you could get really close to the action, but at the risk of of a crashing motorcycle. Something that's been pretty much taken away at the on-road, the off-road circuits, the closed circuits. So where does Scarborough go from here? I honestly don't know, but I fear that we may never see road racing in England again. Another big event that's bitten the dust is the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb over in the USA. The board of directors announced earlier this month that the race to the clouds will no longer invite motorcyclists to take place, and this decision comes after the motorcycles were suspended from competing after the death of Ducati racer Carlin Dunn in 2019. Right, okay. Don't forget, if you enjoy the show, you can pop over to my coffee page, /survival skills. The URL is there on screen. If you do pop over there and take a look, what you'll find is that I have just finished putting up the entire back catalogue of Facebook Tips on Tuesday and Skills on Saturday posts from 2018. That's 100 articles on better biking skills, basically. And they join all the articles that I'd previously put up from 2014 through to 2017. So another 400 articles. So a total of 500 there to read. Plus there's free stuff as well. So there's samples that you can access and have a look at and decide whether they are worth the price of a coffee, because you get 30 days access to everything on the site if you support me to the price of a coffee. Right, okay, on to the final point today, the discussion point. And basically the question I'm asking is waterproofs, and why aren't they waterproof? Now, let's go back a few years. I started riding usual sort of clobber for the time, a leather jacket and a pair of denim jeans, and predictably they weren't waterproof. So what did I do? I did what most riders did at that time, if they didn't want to wear waxed cotton, which was I bought the newfangled cheap nylon oversuits. Now these were basically synthetic material. They had a sort of proofing compound sprayed on them in the manufacturing process, and they were backed with a sort of a nylon liner, which was sort of stuck on to the inside of the actual structure of the jacket. And they were fine for a 30-minute ride twice a day. The suit I had that I bought when I first started riding, I think it lasted me all through university for 3-4 years. But as soon as I became a motorcycle courier, things got rather different. I found that those garments really didn't last very long, and very quickly, when you're sitting on a bike for 10 or 12 hours a day and it's raining for most of that time, you get very wet indeed. So I tried a number of different ways of staying dry. You could, at the time, you can still get them actually for outdoor use. You get these sort of heavy rubberized sou'wester type garments, usually in bright yellow, usually in a cut which doesn't flatter the figure or do much for your riding. Actually, they tend to flap horribly in the breeze. Horrible things, but at least they were totally waterproof until the crutch split on the trousers, which is where they usually failed. Then I found the rucker, what were the couriers all called the boil in the bag suit. Now, these were basically what was called soft handle polyurethane, if I recall correctly. And basically it was a sort of, a plastic bag, a thick plastic, completely waterproof, again, until the seam split. But if you stayed dry on the inside on a wet day, the problem was you also started to sweat badly. If it was at all warm, I generally didn't bother to put the suit on, because I'd just get as damp inside as I would do if I didn't bother with it. So the rucker boil in the bag suit was great in the winter for staying dry, but in the summer it was a bit of a nightmare. Now, the other thing was it was sort of fairly difficult to put on and off, and then they stopped making them around about the same time that I started instructing. I finished with a two-piece suit, which was a bit easier than the one-piece to actually climb into when it did start raining. And as soon as I started instructing, I started looking for an alternative garments. And what I found were the sort of synthetic jackets, the textile fabrics that were coming in at that time. And what I found was that many of them were sold as waterproof. Now, one jacket I did have that I can give you a positive thumbs up for was the Scott road jacket, which I bought, oh crikey, in about 1993, I think. Scott are still around up in the north of England. I'll be fair and say that their garment was excellent, and the only time I ever got in the least bit wet in that jacket was on one day. It was the final day of my instructor training, actually, when it started raining. Well, it was raining at 7 o'clock when I left home, and it was still raining at 7 o'clock when I left the training school for the ride back to Maidstone, and it finally leaked on the day in the forearm here. Everywhere else stayed dry, double zip, or double flap over the zip, stayed perfectly dry. Pockets didn't leak into the jacket, although they tended to fill up with water. It was a great jacket. Anyway, I eventually retired that one. I can't remember why. I think my brother nicked it, actually. And I got hold of some sort of similar looking things, but nothing ever worked quite as well. They were all Gore-Tex lined, but what I found was that the Gore-Tex actually failed very quickly. One I had high hopes for was the Aerostitch, the American-made suit. Now, they got a reputation in the US as being very, very good quality suits, and I bought one in the about 1997, and yep, it was very abrasion resistant. It was very tough. I'm still wearing it. I've just had to put one new zip in. It's a bit tatty in places, but it's still sound. But waterproof, not on your Nelly. It leaked down the zip, and the Gore-Tex failed in the forearms and in the knees almost as soon as I started wearing it. Again, it would have been fine if I'd have been wearing it on the odd weekend here and there. It would have probably lasted me 5 or 6 years before it started to leak. But wearing the darn thing every single day, very often 7 days a week, every day of the month when I was busy, it didn't last more than a few months before it started to leak. So what did I replace that with? Well, I will show you. I do have it here, and I will name and shame. It's this suit here. Let me try and get the name up. It's called a Alpine Stars Dry Star suit. It's 100% polyester on the outside with a, polyamide on the outside with a polyester lining. It's supposed to be Gore-Tex lined. I have no reason to doubt that it was Gore-Tex lined in the past. But what I can tell you again is that the Gore-Tex inner has failed in multiple places. In fact, it failed on the very day it rained for the first time, which was a few days after I bought it. I got wet in it first time it rained. The model was called Dry Star, and probably the fact that it leaked so quickly was why it didn't last long on the shelves. I actually got that one, I have to admit, in a remainder sale at a bargain price. I think I paid about 125 quid for it, which was about half the list price. And that really is the problem. Waterproof garments are increasingly expensive. Now, at the other end of the scheme, you need abrasion resistance. Let me just grab my second demo garment. This is my partner's riding jacket made by Bullet. It scores very highly in abrasion tests. It's quite heavy cotton-based material, but yeah, it does get a good write-up. Is it waterproof? Well, no, it isn't. It's maybe shower resistant, but it's certainly not waterproof, and that sort of cottony material, which is reinforced with Covec, will just soak up the water. So what goes over the top of these things? Well, again, let me grab the next demo item. I don't often wear high-vis, but this is one that I do occasionally put on when the weather's not very good. there's the brand. It's an Oxford one. If I can clear their logo. There it is. It's yes, you can just about make that out. It's an Oxford rain seal. So far, so good. I've had it about, I think, 2.5 years. So as I say, it doesn't come out very often. Couple of times a year. I've got somebody at the door. Hang on a minute. So, my apologies. Right, apologies for the interruption in the show there. I'm just taking a parcel in live on there. That's the problem. So, right, where were we? I was talking about the Oxford rain jacket there. As I said, it lasted a couple of years because I don't wear it an awful lot, just really when it's raining. It usually lives in the top box, and that's where it stays. How are these things made? Well, here is a slightly older one. This is by a brand called Keto, which is now no more. And what you can see is that the outside, if I can get it in the camera, the outside is the sort of conventional nylon. But if you look on the inside, what you can see are taped seams and a sort of thin polythene or something coating, a plasticky coating on the inside. And what happens, unfortunately, with these is that the seams start to lift off. I found one earlier where you can actually see where it's starting to come adrift. If you look there, just under my finger there, you can see that the seam, that plasticky tape, is actually starting to come off. So once that fails and lifts, then it's over the back of the stitching. The stitching basically becomes a hole where water can get in and your jacket is going to leak. But the good thing is, I mean, those are relatively cheap. At the moment, they've got a motorcycle branding on them. Of course, they tend to be overpriced, so I tend to look for them in sort of sales and bargain basement bin ends. But so you can easily pay 60, 70 pounds for something like that. Or you just go to a hiking store and you can get something very similar for not much more than a tenner. And once it leaks at the end of a year's use, you just throw it in the bin and buy another one. So the choice is yours. Why don't I go for something like the new suits which have the laminated waterproof layer bonded to the outside of the suit? Well, quite simply, I'm not entirely convinced that they'll last particularly long. If it's on the outside, it's subject to all the wear and tear and abrasion that you would expect simply from sitting on a motorcycle. I know people are swearing by these suits and giving them good write-ups, but I wonder what will happen 2-3 years down the line. You know, as I say, if you are a weekend rider and you only take the bike out in nice weather, you can wear something like that and you'll probably never know whether it leaks or not. But if you're a professional rider, and even though I'm not as busy as I used to be, no longer doing the basic training, I still class myself as such. If you're a professional rider and you're out in all weathers, then you need something that really does work and is guaranteed to work, and is guaranteed to work for a long time. And that's the real problem. I simply cannot afford to be spending £1,000 on a waterproof jacket and having to replace it every year or two. So you know, I'm sure people will tell me how wonderful these laminated materials actually are, based on their own experience. But realistically, I'm yet to find anything that matches the rucker for waterproofness. Well, that is to say, until I just happened to be on eBay the other day and I came across this. And basically, this is the same sort of material that the rucker suit was made out of. It's that soft handle polythene. It's entirely waterproof. It's waterproof in both directions, which means you will sweat in it. Hence the little holes in the armpits, which are supposed to keep you all ventilated. I'm sure they'll do absolutely nothing. The jacket is made by a Sturgis. They do have a logo on there somewhere. There it is. There we are. And you'll find them on eBay from suppliers at the moment for £17, I think it cost me. So I bought a couple of these, one to wear myself, because the other thing is that they actually fold down to absolutely nothing compared with a lot of the waterproof jackets. I could get that a lot smaller if I tried. It really does compress to nothing. Compared with the waterproof jackets with the liners, the unnecessary liners and the pockets and all the other stuff, which end up taking up a lot of space in your luggage. That could almost go in a bum bag if you wanted it to. There's a pair of matching trousers. I haven't bought those yet. I may or may not, I don't know. But anyway, that's my latest purchase in the way of staying waterproof. So basically, I've turned the clock back to those boil in the bag rucker suits that so many couriers loved back in the 1980s. All right, okay, that is it for another show. Just a quick reminder, if you are interested, there is a talk on cornering, which is going out on, when is it going out? The first Wednesday in the month. So we're into September now. So it's on Wednesday, the 1st of September. That one will be called Cornering with Confidence. And basically what it will be looking at is the use of what I call the roadmap for corners, which help us time our machine inputs correctly for the bend and and they help us pick a line around the corner. So that event starts, as I say, 8 p.m. Wednesday, 1st of September. Tickets are £8. No, they're not. They're £5. Why am I saying £8? Because it's 8 p.m. I'm confusing myself. I'm writing at the same time as I'm trying to put a comment up on the post. So the link to the event is, actually get it copied over, which I'm struggling with at the moment. There we go, another one. Another go, and it's coming up any moment now. There, if you want to see Cornering with Confidence, about 40 minutes or so of chit chat, and then there's some time for questions at the end if I haven't explained anything well. You're all more than welcome to pop along for that, and that's pretty much it for the show. Clive has just said he loves a demo. Well, you've certainly got a demo there, Clive. Paul says that he doesn't trust waterproof labels, and I tend to agree with you on that. He says he's got a Mountain Warehouse cycling jacket and Bellhouse walking trousers, and yes, I think that's basically motorcycle kit is very often overpriced for what it is, and if you look in alternative stores for outdoor activities, you will find better kit at a cheaper price. Nigel says, good morning, just in time for the end. Well, never mind, you can catch up later. Right, that's it for today. Next show, I will be looking at new Triumphs, and I will tell you all about the bike I think that Triumph should have built a decade ago, which looks like it's coming to us in just a few months' time. Right, okay, thank you very much indeed. Stay safe out there, enjoy your riding, and I've got hopefully, there we go, got a new outro.